Hey guys, Mr. Pokke here, back with another video. So today's episode of Pokke Academy will finally be discussing about weakness breaking and everything that is related to this topic. Right, so we're going to be covering weakness breaks, breaking efficiency, break effect, different elements kind of break, how do we actually get the break damage formula, all these kind of good things will be in today's content. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it, yeah? Right, so for the very first thing that I want to clear up with everybody right now is that break effect is different from break efficiency, but I believe that we more or less already have this understanding after playing the game for a couple of months that there are different things. But in case that people that watch my videos still don't really understand this, is that break efficiency, it is how fast the enemy's toughness bar depletes, right? So the enemy toughness bar is referring to this white thing over here that you see every single day, right? For most units, the damage dealt to the toughness bar, your auto attack will deal like 1 point of damage, your skill will deal 2 times, and then your ultimate will do 3 times. It's not exactly 1 damage, 2 damage, 3 damage, but this is just like a multiplier, right? So auto, skill, ultimate is 1, 2, 3. There are some exceptions to this scenario, where such as like your Asta's E, her single ability E can hit the same target repeatedly, and this will have a higher toughness bar damage than other units, for example, right? So just take this as a general guideline. So how does break efficiency affect your toughness bar depletion, right? So for example, if your unit has 50% break efficiency, although currently we cannot get this break efficiency stat from anywhere other than Simulated Universe, that's one specific bar from Nihility, but in the future we might be able to see this, right? But for example, if a unit has 50% break efficiency, then their damage dealt to the toughness bar, instead of being 1, 2, and 3, it will now be 1.5, 3, and 4.5, right? So that is all you need to know for break efficiency. With that out of the way, your damage upon break and all other effects is not determined by break efficiency, but rather your break effect, alongside with a lot of different factors that I will be discussing later on. Right. Now, using my example of 1, 2, 3 on your auto skill and out, then using that as a baseline, the Japat's toughness bar at Forgotten Hall level 15 will have a total toughness bar of 10. So in other words, if you were to use your out, a damaging out that does damage twice, as long as your skills 2 times, then Japat's toughness bar will be fully depleted. The exact value of the toughness bar will be seen over here. Different enemies will always have different toughness bar gauges, and for your reference to find out exactly how much toughness bar each enemy have, please kindly refer to the Honkai Star Rail wiki. They have an excellent database for a lot of enemy stats, right? Because I think this is one of the only websites that I can find where it actually provides your enemy stats, like your enemy resistance levels, your HP, your attack, your defense, even the toughness bar. So if you want to reference this website, feel free to do so over here, right? But with that out of the way, upon breaking the enemy's toughness bar, which is where your toughness bar reaches 0, there will be additional damage dealt to the target, as well as 7 different kinds of effects will be applied, depending on the character's element. Now, calculating break damage. The first and most important factor to consider before even factoring all the break damage formula, right, is your base damage. Your base damage will be affected by your element. So all the different elements will have different sorts of multipliers, right? So you can see over here, physical and fire is at 2, ice, lightning is at 1, wind is at 1.5, and then quantum and imaginary is lower at 0.5. Aside from that, there's also 7 different kinds of effects that's respective to their elements. So if you guys want to take a closer look, feel free to navigate around the Honkai Star Rail wiki. But with that out of the way, the above portion is considered the base damage, right? So this is our base damage. So it will be this multiplier here, which is either 2, 1, 1.5, or 0.5, multiplied by your level multiplier, multiplied by your max toughness multiplier. I'll be explaining all this later on, so this is just something to take note, right? All different elements will have different sorts of effects, as well as different final break damage. Now, before I finally get into exactly how break damage is going to be calculated, right, I first want you guys to take a look at this chart over here that I have created myself, based on the different effects that each element do. Because although you may have the resources to tell you exactly what each element does, but how do you really process this information and make it to the most benefit for your team, right? So this is some chart that you guys may refer to in the future, right? So for physical, they are good against high HP enemies, such as bosses. Whereas for fire, they are good against low HP enemies, such as mobs. Now, why do I say this? It's because your physical's effect, if you take a look at this wiki, it does percentage max health damage against the enemy. 7% for elite or bosses and 16% for mobs. But your fire's damage, your DOT, right, it is fixed. So I did a little bit of rough calculation. And I found out that as long as your target's HP is less than 23,500 for your mobs, or less than 53,800 for your elite or bosses, then your fire's DOT damage is going to be higher than physical. Now for reference, right, you see those little small bats and spider bomb enemies that you see? Yeah, those mobs at level 90 only have a HP of 16,498, which is way lesser than 23,500. So in these scenarios, against mobs, fire will output more damage than physical. So that's that out of the way. Now for ice, they are good against self-buffers. What do I mean by self-buffers? I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there's a lot of times in MOC, there are a lot of enemies that buff themselves, right? And give them attack buff, defense buff, all these kind of different buffs. So a good thing that ice have against this enemy is after the enemy is unfrozen, their action values actually advanced forward, which is to say their turn will push up after they are unfrozen. So because their turns are pushed up, this will indirectly reduce the enemy's buff uptime. So that's why they are good against self-buffers for ice. Now for lightning, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later on, but for wind and quantum, wind is good against low toughness bar enemies, while quantum is good against high toughness bar enemies. Now why do I say this? This ultimately depends on how the DOT is affected, right? Because for both wind and quantum, which is their wind shear and entanglement, they can be stacked up to 5 times. But for wind, you can only apply additional wind shears upon every break, right? So for example, if the enemy is broken for the first time, like for a mob, you apply 1 wind shear. Whereas if it's for elite or bosses, you apply 3 wind shear, right? So after they are broken and then they recover, right, you have to break them again to apply an additional stack of wind shear. So this is going to be problematic if your enemy has a very high toughness bar. So your wind element will not be able to break these high toughness bars enemies very fast, right? But against low toughness bars where you can continuously break these enemies, it will allow you to stack your wind shear very easily. Now for quantum, they are good against high toughness bar enemies because the way that the entanglement refreshes is per attack while broken. You don't have to wait for the enemy to regain toughness bar and then break them again, right? It's just in that one break, deal as much damage as possible with as many attacks as you can. Another important thing to note is Quantum's DOT is the only DOT that scales with your toughness bar. Which is to say, the higher your toughness bar is, the more damage your entanglement is going to do. That's why you can see crazy numbers from Break Effect Silver Wolf, because if you break her against enemies with a very high toughness bar such as your bosses and elites, then the entanglement is going to do way more damage. So that's why Quantum is good against high toughness bar enemies. And lastly, for Imaginary, they're good against high-speed enemies. Why? Because Imaginary, on top of reducing the enemy's action value, they also reduce their speed, right? And speed reduction is going to be more valuable against a target that has higher speed. So just think of the scenario where 25% speed reduction against an enemy with 100 speed versus 200 speed, right? The one with 100 speed, you only reduce it by 25. But the one with 200 speed, you reduce it by 50. So that's why I say Imaginary is better against high-speed enemies. Now, let me go back into the point of Lightning. What do I mean by carried by units? Unfortunately, Lightning DOT right now, in my opinion, it is the weakest DOT with regards to Break Effect. Lightning is an odd spot because they don't do as much damage as others while not providing any sort of crowd control. So they're just literally just there to do damage. But the damage they do is also not considered very high. Now what do I mean by carried by units is because if you take a look at Servo and in the future Kafka, they synergize very well with the shock, because if you take a look at their kits, they help extend the duration of shocks, they help to instantly trigger shock, but no other element right now can have such valuable supports for their element, right? So that's why I say they are carried by the units, but the effect itself, which is the shock effect, it is not very good compared to other elements, right? So this is the elemental break effect summary. So if you guys want to think about which element does well against which corresponding enemy, because you guys need to keep in mind an enemy have different weaknesses, right? So you can break an enemy with one of the 3 different weaknesses that they have. So I hope that with this chart you can now better determine what kind of weakness break would you want to inflict on an enemy out of the 3 elements. So that is the objective of this comp. Alright, so with that out of the way, I can finally go into what I think everyone came here to see, which is the break damage formula, right? Your break damage, it is determined by your base damage, and this base damage, as we have mentioned over here, is determined on your element, right? Different elements is going to have different base damage. On top of that, this is also affected by your level as well as your max toughness, right? So since we're already on this tag, like I mentioned just now as well, your max toughness is dependent on the enemy's toughness bar. So TLDR, the longer or the bigger your enemy's toughness bar is, the more damage you're going to do with your target, right? But the smaller the toughness bar, then the less damage you're going to do. So that's just your base damage, right? So base damage multiplied by your break effect, which is something that we already all know, multiplied by your enemy's defense, your enemy's res, your enemy's vulnerability, as well as your enemy's state of being broken or not, right? So I'm gonna explain a little bit on the 4 factors behind, because I think we all know that break effect affects break damage, but I'm not sure if everybody really know exactly what the 4 other factors refer to, right? So for defense, right, enemies' break damage is actually scaled to defense. So it is a standard defense formula which is gonna be applied. So the lower your enemy's defense, the more damage you're gonna do, right? So skills that decrease enemy defense will include like Silver Wolf, your Pella, or even your Resolution Light Cone, which all decreases defense. So all these things will help increase the break damage, right? Rest. Any skills that reduce enemy rest will also increase break damage. So right now, one of the only units that we have that can reduce enemy rest is Silver Wolf, her E, which reduces the target's elemental rest if the target doesn't have the right element, as well as all element rest, right? So the lesser their rest, the more your break damage. Vulnerability. It is any skills that increases damage taken. Now, before Silver Wolf came out, we actually already have a unit that increases damage taken, which is none other than our daddy, Welt Yang, Water Yang. Or he actually has the ability that increases damage taken if you take a look at his traces, where after casting an ultimate, you increase the damage taken for the enemy by 12%, right? So any sort of skills that increase damage taken will increase the damage dealt by your break, right? So this is coming from my Welt, as well as the newly released Incessant Rain, the Aether Code, also increases damage taken, right? So that's that. But one important thing that I want to highlight over here is your damage taken, it is not to be confused with damage percentage, right? It is very, very different from damage percentage, such as your Bronya's E, your Tin Yun's ultimate, and all your elemental damage, like your Quantum Sphere, your Lightning Sphere, all these aligning damage. They're all not affected by this. They're completely 2 different things. Damage taken, it is different from damage percentage. So I just hope that everyone understands this a little bit. And then finally for broken, before you break the target, right, every single damage source that is applied to the enemy, not just including break, like any of your ultimate, your skill, your basic attack, all these kind of things, it is multiplied at a 90% multiplier, right? So this is for all damage sources. But upon breaking your enemy, all damage sources will then be returned to their normal multiplier, which is 1.0. So this is important because before breaking, all damage is going to be 0.9. So including the instance where you break the target, because technically the target has not been broken yet. So at the very instance where you break the target, you must multiply your damage source by 0.9. But every single thing after that, so this is all your DOTs that comes with your break, right? Your burn, your bleed, your entanglement, freeze, all the chunk or whatever, right? All this will be applied at 1.0. So that is the generic break damage formula. But if you guys want a way more detailed formula, you guys can take a look at the Honkai Star Rail Wiki. They also have a lot of very, very good resources with regards to break damage. But for this video, it is not just all about math. I just want you guys to understand how this works. So to help you guys understand how this works, there is no other better example than the practical application, right? Here is an in-depth example. All this testing is going to be done against the Ep8 at Forgotten Hall level 15, which is a level 65 Ep8, right? So our very, very first example, very, very straightforward, right? We're going to be using a level 78 Jingyuan with 11% break effect against our level 65 Ep8 over here. He has a toughness bar of 300, as we have derived from the Honkai Star Rail Wiki. And we will inflict break with Jingyuan's ultimate. There is no debuffs, as you can see from Ep8 over here, right? He has not a single debuff. So how is break damage calculated here? How do we get this 5718 from the break, right? So how do we get this number over here, right? You can just take a look at the formula. I've plugged in the respective values. So for example, the base damage is 1 multiplied by 3562.38. Now where do we get this 3562.38? It is referring to the level, right? So our level 78 Jingyuan is going to have this number every single time, right? So any level 78 units will be doing this for their base damage in their level multiplier. Every single unit, right? It is fixed. And to where do we get this number? Once again, you can find out from Honkai Star Rail Wiki, right? And then this is the second line, part of the base damage formula. So our final base damage is going to be 10687.14. So this is our base damage. Our break effect is only 11%, so it's just going to be 11% over here. And our defense, we're going to be plugging our values into our defense formula, right? So 78 plus 20 divided by 65, which is the level of our Ep8, plus 20 multiplied by 1, because we do not have any defense breaks, plus 78 plus 20. So this is going to give us a defense multiplier of 0.5355, right? And then our rest, our vulnerability, they're all at 1 because we have no effects, no debuffs whatsoever affecting our Ep8 right now. And finally, our broken is going to be at 0.9 because, like I mentioned just now, any damage source before you actually break the target needs to be multiplied by 0.9. So with this, we will come to our final damage of 5717.44, which is a little bit off from the 5718, but this is to be expected because there are some decimals that I didn't really account for. So after a few decimal errors running out and then, you will get roughly this number. So that's how you get break damage applying our formula, right? Now, another example to apply what we have learned today, right, which is how Rare's defense vulnerability affects our target. This can be seen from a Silver Wolf example that I've also done over here. So, Silver Wolf, with now 16.8% break effect, we will break our target with an auto attack. At the point of the auto attack, our target has a 6.5% defense now, 12% increased damage taken, as well as minus 12% rest. But as you can see over here, there's also a minus 20% quantum rest. Why do I not apply this? It is because our Japat originally already have 20% quantum rest. So minus 20% plus 20% is just gonna net to 0. So that is why this line is ignored. So what we care about is this 6.5% defense reduction, 12% all damage rest reduction, as well as 12% damage taken. All other things will not be factored into our break damage formula, right? So applying the same scenario, our quantum is going to be at a multiplier of 0.5 multiplied by the level 78 multiplier, which is going to be 3562 point all these numbers, and you're going to get a number of 5343.57. Our break effect is going to be 16.8% as mentioned over here. Then our defense formula, we just plug in all the values over here and blah blah. Then we apply our defense down, right? We have a minus 6.5% defense down. So this multiplier is going to minus 6.5, right? And then we'll have a defense multiplier of 0.55219. And then for our rest, because the rest is reduced by 12%, the rest multiplier will increase by 12%, so it's 1.12. Then for vulnerability, because our target's damage taken is increased by 12%, then vulnerability is also 1.12. Then finally for break is 0.9, and our final damage taken is going to be 3890.82, which is very, very close to 3894, right? And because of all the rounding errors, decimal, blah blah, so this is how you can see all these things come together to also affect your break damage. So I hope that these two examples is not too difficult, but if you guys need more time, feel free to rewind the video and take a look at yourself. Or if you guys want to experiment with yourself, feel free to apply some of the factors and go and test it out on your own units at your own stages. Final summary. There is more than just levels and break effects affecting break damage, right? In the past, why break effect was considered so weak, especially when the game just released, right, on April 26, all the way up to the end of patch 1.0, was because number one, we lacked a lot of things that increase break damage. Like, the only thing that could increase break damage in the past was either you play Pella with defense break, or just building in your defense break stacks, right, or break effect stacks. But we don't have any other sources that can really increase all these damage taken. With the introduction of Silver Wolves, such as the Aether Code, rest reduction, all these things were not available to us at the start of the game, right? That is the first reason. But the second reason, and technically the more important reason, is that we are heavily under-leveled, right? Because a big portion of our break damage is tied to our levels on top of the defense multiplier. They're all tied to our levels. And because we're under-leveled, our damage dealt is going to be lesser, and our enemy's defense multiplier is going to be higher against us, right? So that's why break effect was so weak at the start of the game, right? But now, with the release of 1.1, we now have access to more units, light cones that can cause defense break, reduce rest, increase damage taken, and combined with our team is now being at higher levels, right? Because we already have Wills being access to level 80, all that kind of stuff, as well as Silver Wolf being able to implant any weakness that you want. Break effect may now be a very, very viable build going forward into the future. So with that, I've come to the end of this episode's Pokke Academy with regards to weakness breaking. I hope you guys have managed to take away something from today's lesson and learn that break effect is really not that meme of a set. I think it's really going to be very viable, especially going forward, right, with a lot more characters that is going to be tied to DOTs such as Kafka, right? So that's all for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.